people lived here for 800 years, before dying out suddenly 1,200 years ago. No one knows what caused the bizarre deformities. Now, after years of speculation, a team of archaeologists and forensic scientists believe they have unlocked the mystery of this extraordinary race. A mystery which, for decades, they struggled to explain. Giuseppe Orefici, from the Italian Center for Pre-Columbian Archaeology, has been studying the Nazca skeletons for the last 20 years. Many of the Nazca burial sites have been looted. The valuable textiles and jewelry have been stolen. But the skulls still have a remarkable story to tell.
We've not found a single skull from the Nazca area that is not deformed. All of them, absolutely all of them, present these deformities.
Many of them have ended up in the largest collection of skulls in the world. The cranium room at the National Anthropology Museum in Lima, Peru, contains over 10,000 specimens, alongside forensic reconstructions of how some of them might have looked. Some are pure coneheads. Others are even more exotic, with beehives and even twin peaks. These people look as if they could have come from another world. Evidence of the Nazca civilization stayed hidden for hundreds of years. But in the early 1930s, pilots flying over southern Peru reported remarkable features etched into the surface of the desert. Today we know them as the Nazca Lines, an intricate network of geometric and animal shapes. More than 1,000 of these gigantic drawings are spread over an area of 400 square miles. No one knows how and why they were placed here. The lines were clearly designed to be seen from above, prompting suggestions they'd been created by aliens. Archaeologists spent over 50 years trying to understand these geoglyphs from the evidence on the ground. But the discovery of the bizarre-shaped skulls fueled the alien invasion argument. There's no evidence to support these claims, but until now, there's been no alternative proof. Over the years, scientific experts have looked at a variety of medical conditions which could explain the cone-shaped skulls. The most famous example is the case of John Merrick, the Elephant Man, whose condition proved that certain types of disease can alter the shape of the human skull. His head reached an astonishing 36 inches in circumference. Merrick suffered from Proteus syndrome, a rare condition which causes bony tumors. It's only been recorded 120 times in all human history. However, there are other more common illnesses which could explain this mystery.
When he was born, some doctors came to me and asked me did I want to put him away. He had the face deformity. It was really different. I never seen anything like it before. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't even ready for it.
Wilhelmina's son Douglas was born with a genetic bone abnormality called Cruzon syndrome. His skull shape bore a striking resemblance to the skulls found at Nazca.
My doctor said it was a rarity, but it's a possibility I could have been a twin. So I'm just living day by day, doing the best that I can, and trying to do the best so I get out of school and go to college, live a normal life like everyone else, so I can succeed in life.
You know that I love you, right?
Douglas is now 18. Despite 20 operations, he still suffers from the dangerous complications of his underlying condition. His skull has stopped growing, but his brain has not.
I have migraine headaches. I have headaches that would last from the time I open my eyes at probably about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to about 7 o'clock in the evening.
The skull of a healthy newborn is made up of 27 bones linked together by soft cartilage. During the first year of life, the bones grow to replace the cartilage and start to fuse together. They continue to fuse until we're 18 years old. But if this process happens too early, the results can be catastrophic. Douglas is being treated at Chicago Children's Hospital by neurosurgeon Dr. David Frim.
In the front, they were closed when he was born, and so his skull was quite wide, as well as the orbits of the eye, the area where the eyes are, and the rims above the eye. They were all mal-shaped, and his eyes were quite far apart.
Douglas's skull has fused together prematurely, but his brain continues to grow. The pressure results in crippling headaches. If left untreated, it can be fatal.
They're planning on increasing my forehead so that my brain can have more space in my skull.
Without modern surgery, the Nazca would have died if they'd had this disease.
I'm just praying that this surgery be my cure and that God heals me.
So could Cruzon syndrome be the explanation for the cone-shaped skulls of the Nazca? CT scans of the skulls of people with Cruzons show the telltale signs of premature fusing. But when the medical experts analyzed the Nazca skulls in the same way, they appeared to be normal.
No buzzing.
In Dr. Frim's surgery, there's another patient whose condition could lead to skull distortion like that of the Nazca. Young Jesus has hydrocephalus, an inherited disease which could have affected the Nazca. His spinal fluid is being produced faster than his body can dispose of it. Without treatment, the heads of children with this disease continue to grow.
Some of them literally couldn't get out of bed because their heads were so big compared to their bodies, they couldn't lift their heads up.
It's possible this genetic abnormality could have affected the entire Nazca population.
We had to implant a shunting device, so a plastic tube like this into the brain ventricles.
Today, a simple surgical procedure can drain excess fluid from inside the skull.
If this is in your head, then there's this much of it curled around inside you.
If the Nazca were suffering from hydrocephalus, they would have been desperate to find a way of relieving the resulting pressure on their brains, and there's evidence that they did just that. These holes are the result of trepanning, the ancient practice of cutting holes in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. John Verano is a physical anthropologist and leading expert on trepanning. He's made a detailed study of the cone-shaped skulls.
It was not recognized as being done by prehistoric people until the 1860s, when a skull was presented to the Anthropological Society of Paris. And it was an Inca skull, and it had a hole much like this. It was in the forehead, but it was pretty much identical to this one. And what was so exciting was that it had some evidence of reaction around it, indicating it was done when the person was alive and that they had lived for a short time afterwards.
The Nazca had developed the oldest form of surgery yet known in order to cure head injuries and disease. Healing around the trepanations showed that a remarkable 75% of patients had survived the procedure. The ancients appeared to have achieved their success using simple disposable tools. Trepanation proves the Nazca were treating some kind of medical problem, but the vital evidence, the brain itself, was missing. However, a technique's now been developed which allows us to recreate the missing brain tissue and see whether the hydrocephalus theory is correct.
This is from a normal specimen. I would estimate the cranial capacity to be about 1,500 cc's. This is from an individual from Peru, and this individual was an adult. It was not a child.
Valerie O'Loughlin has developed a technique for identifying brain disease by analysing the interior surface of the human skull. Using wax and latex, she makes a mould of the inside. The latex captures the veins and internal structure of the brain of each individual. She's looking for an abnormal pattern of veins which will point to hydrocephalus. But after examining several skulls, she concludes that the brains inside had been normal. The cone-shaped skulls did not belong to hydrocephalus sufferers. And after examining over 600 Nazca skulls, John Verano also concluded that there was another, far more likely explanation for trepanation.
In Peru in particular, some early researchers noticed, and it's been confirmed since through my studies and others, that there often is a skull fracture associated with these, and it's a practical way to relieve pressure from broken-in fragments, a way to drain hemorrhages, basically to deal with head wounds.
The lack of a medical explanation for the cone-shaped skulls was beginning to frustrate the archaeologists. But ironically, it was another missing piece of evidence which produced the breakthrough they were looking for. It came from inside the ruins of Nazca's ancient city of Kwache. "1800 years ago, the ancient city of the Nazca civilization in Peru was inhabited entirely by people with bizarre-shaped skulls. Archaeologists had no idea why. For over half a century, they'd struggled and failed to find the answer. Medical science had proved only that the deformity was not genetic or brought on by disease. But now the archaeologists believed the answer could lie amongst the ruined buildings of the city itself. In the local Quechua dialect, these ruins are called Kwache, or come and look. This ancient place lies at the geographical heart of the Nazca lines.
Examining the area of Kwache, the central nucleus is made up of 4 square kilometers. But taking into account the total extension of the city, it covers 24 square kilometers. This is the largest cultural center in the world made of adobe.
Kwache had the largest adobe pyramid in the New World. At the time, the Nazca were the most advanced society in South America, but the mystery of why they died out remains. At Kwache, it was a missing piece of the jigsaw that gave Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Orefici a vital clue as to what was going on.
In reality, Kwache was not a city. In its interior area, there are no ruins of dwellings, no ruins of rooms, no ruins of kitchens.
In all of these ruins, there's nothing to suggest anyone lived here. Orefici concluded that if Kwache was not inhabited, it must be a city of the spirit, a religious center. He believed people came here from hundreds of miles across the Pampa, bringing offerings of textiles, ceramics, food. The mystery of the cone-shaped skulls had acquired a new dimension. At the San Diego Museum of Mankind, bioarchaeologist Christine Torres Roof started looking for evidence of the existence of an elite class of Nazca priests.
I'm looking at indicators of health status in an attempt to see differences between what might be considered an elite class and a non-elite class.
But despite months of painstaking research, Torres Roof could find no evidence of a priestly elite linked to the cone-shaped skulls.
We're looking at cemeteries, like that of the village of Pueblo Viejo, where we found the bodies of peasants and agricultural workers. They too have deformed skulls. This shows that there was no class differentiation in terms of the skull deformities.
But there might be other clues hidden in the perfectly preserved burial sites. All the dead had masses of hair. One body had dreadlocks almost 20 feet in length. This profusion of hair must have been used to create fantastic hairstyles that would have accentuated their already bizarre heads. On top of this, they wore elaborate headdresses. The desert environment ensured that many survive to this day. Perhaps the headdresses and the cone-shaped heads could somehow be linked. A tantalizing clue came from a truly modern practice.
Yeah, but it looks like this is starting to get a bit tight. They could pull that out a little bit. Yeah.
Nowadays, parents tend to lay their babies on their backs to reduce the possibility of cot death. But this practice has caused a new condition, positional plagiopathy.
Melanie, as you saw, is a lovely-looking child, but when she came to us, she had a problem that's become more and more common in this country in the last few years, that of molding of the back of her head from laying on it too much. Ready, 1, 2, 3, yep.
Dr. Frim is using a plastic helmet to mold the child's soft skull back to its original shape.
I know, you're awfully smart, because now you can take it off.
Perhaps the Nazca Indians recognized and harnessed the malleability of the infant skull.
When you're this young, your skull bones are almost paper thin. If you restrict the growth of the skull in one way or another, that is by pushing on the back or on the front or on the top, the skull then grows in a compensatory fashion. It needs to get bigger, and it'll grow in an odd shape as a result.
And Verano's theory about deliberate skull shaping was backed up by evidence from the Malaccas Islands of the Pacific. Here they use resin from the candle nut to soften the skin in preparation for binding the head with coconut fibers. The headdress would typically be worn for the first year of life. North American Indians also wrapped the heads of their babies with similar results. The first European settlers referred to them as flathead Indians. And even the cradles in which they carried their newborn children are remarkably similar to those found in other parts of South America. Perhaps these people were true masters of head shaping.
It seems to be something that was invented independently in many parts of the world, perhaps by children being wrapped in certain ways and then just observing that their heads change shape.
All the archaeologists needed now was proof that head shaping was practiced by the Nazca.
We were very lucky. It's the only case that I'm aware of. We found a deforming device actually applied to a boy in a grove in Quache. This deforming device comprised of belts made from llama skins, which were fitted in order to create the desired form.
So the people of Quache were deliberately molding the skulls of their babies.
Some of these more extreme types where the endocast is very flattened, I wouldn't be surprised if these individuals may have had pressure inside their skulls. Maybe they had an increased headaches while the deforming apparatus was on them.
It's hard to imagine why any Nazca mother would put her newborn child through such a permanent and potentially painful process.
Doing something as drastic as modifying your head shape, which is an easily visible thing and is easily recognizable both in interactions and even at a distance, is a really clean and easy way of identifying yourself as a member of a particular group.
Despite the passing centuries, the markets in the modern town of Nazca have not changed dramatically. Seafood, corn, and beans have all been excavated from Nazca villages. But the modern inhabitants have something else in common. Once a week, farmers from the highlands come to sell their produce. They all wear the same distinctive hats, which distinguish them instantly from people who live on the coast.
I think it is important in almost all societies to differentiate between the members of your particular population and the members of external populations for all kinds of exchange relationships, for any kind of alliances, and the development of your own kind of identity.
It seems the people of ancient Nazca expressed their unique identity through the shape of their heads. Some forms of body alteration to establish a group identity are still practiced today. They raise the question of whether head binding could make a reappearance at some time in the future.
I think it is a practice that could come back, only in the sense that it's so popular now to modify your body in different ways, piercing and tattooing and even trepanation, self-trepanation. Cranial deformation is not much more bizarre.
The cone-shaped skulls were not signs of a disease that wiped out this civilization. Instead, they were a crucial part of ancient Nazca culture, a culture that bound this complex society together for nearly 1,000 years. 1,800 years ago, this landscape was green and fertile thanks to a sophisticated network of canals. The water allowed the Nazca to grow crops and nourish great forests and produce vast quantities of their distinctive pottery. Giuseppe Orefici thinks the demise of the Nazca may have more to do with pottery production than the shape of their heads.
If we calculate that there are 2 million ceramics, which are held in world museums and private collections, we would have to burn 400 square kilometers of forest to create that quantity of ceramics. So the Nazcas were also partly responsible for turning this area into a desert.
Archaeologists have now established that many of the Nazca lines point to different sources of the commodity they valued above everything else, water. The giant drawings on the ground were offerings to the gods who made this land so green and fertile. But by producing huge volumes of pottery and other artifacts, the Nazca wiped out the forests and sowed the seeds of their own destruction. The water sources dried up as the gods they worshipped turned against them.
The morning of August the 24th, AD 79, dawned bright and clear over the Roman cities that dotted the lush hills around the Bay of Naples. In the villas of Pompeii, citizens of a great empire slept serenely, unsuspecting. The elegant public baths were quiet. In the suburb of Oplontis, a young woman of some means slipped on her rings and went about her business. Strolling the sleepy, cobbled streets, an early riser may have cast a glance at the summit of Mount Vesuvius to the north and noticed a thin column of rising smoke, paying it little heed. But at the foot of the mountain, a woman awoke to find the dawn darkened by ash and sent a servant off to ask for help. By the time the note reached its destination, it would be too late. Modern-day catastrophes like these have taken a terrible toll, but have also proved a boon to scientists struggling to understand the last hellish hours of Pompeii. Already the ash was coming down, wrote Pliny the Younger about the events of AD 79. One could hear the moans of women, the cries of babies, the screaming of men. Many lifted up their arms to the gods. Even greater numbers affirmed that there were no longer any gods, and that this was the last night of the world. For the cities in the shadow of Vesuvius, the last night of the world lasted for 15 centuries. So completely did Vesuvius obliterate Pompeii and her neighbors of Herculaneum, Stabae, and Oplontis, that the memory of where the cities had been was soon forgotten. By the Middle Ages, only a faint echo survived in the local folklore. The area south of Vesuvius was called La Civita, or the city, even though no city remained. Then, in the late 1500s, tunnel diggers ran across ancient inscriptions and walls in the ash. But it was not until 1748 that excavations began in earnest. The science of archaeology grew up here. What began as a race to collect classical art treasures for royal houses matured into a painstaking study of an ancient culture. Much of what has been found here is known the world over. Its grand public places, elegant villas, stunning mosaics, and lavish bathhouses richly encapsulate what is known of the life of leisure in ancient Roman times. As do its exuberant self-portraits of sensual excess. In stark contrast to the art and architecture are the equally famous final agonies of those entombed in Vesuvian ash. In the 1860s, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli recognized that many of the human remains being excavated were found in hollows, which he thought might actually contain the outlines of the victims. He pumped plaster into one of the hollows to create a cast, and the results astonished the world. Pompeii's ghoulish statues of death fascinate us as much today as when they first emerged from the ashes some 130 years ago. But they remained largely curiosities, as have the hundreds of discarded skeletons. Only now are the dead of Pompeii undergoing scientific analysis, and only now is science coming to grips with the full extent of the horrors they endured. Almost 2,000 years too late to help her, and thousands of miles from home, the Lady of Oplontis makes news by undergoing high-tech medical scans at the University of Sydney in Australia. Named for the suburb of Pompeii where she was discovered in 1984, the Lady of Oplontis became a test case for a new type of casting. Instead of plaster, which shrinks and bubbles while drying, the archaeologist used resin. Resin also has the advantage of being transparent, so the archaeologist can visually inspect the bones and the few possessions the lady clutched as she tried to flee through the falling ash. A jeweled bracelet and a purse. Her caretaker is archaeologist and anatomist Estelle Laser.
Okay. What we're looking at here is an X-ray of the cast, and apart from the bones, you can also see that she was carrying a purse with various valuables in it, including some coins, and on her arm you can see that she had a bracelet. From the bones we can establish various things about her. One is that we are in fact looking at a female, and the best bone for indicating this is the pelvis. This angle here is a very good indicator that we have got a female. Various other features on the bone enable us to determine that she was probably between 30 and 35 years of age when she died.
The Lady of Oplontis was also CAT scanned. The technology provides what is essentially a cross-section of the skeleton in its resin cast. These detailed medical records of the lady will serve as a baseline for Laser, who is systematically studying the bones of the Pompeii dead. Beneath the streets of Pompeii, dark catacombs are strewn with chaotic rubble. Look closely, and the rubble resolves itself into bones, guaranteed to instill despair in most anatomists. Look closer, and the futility of ever assembling them into skeletons becomes clear.
Pompeii is a particular challenge to our archaeologists studying bones because the skeletons weren't collected systematically over the first 150 years of excavation. They were really just collected for their grotesque sort of imagery, and they were stored in places like the Cenobites where we are now. And they were stored in huge piles and they became completely disarticulated.
Because she has scattered bones instead of skeletons, she must study them en masse, using statistics. Under mathematical scrutiny, piles of left and right leg bones, left and right pelvises, and rows of skulls yield a picture of the average Pompeian. The popular view of the eruption of Vesuvius is that it struck down the young, the wealthy, and the cosmopolitan from all corners of the Roman world as they cavorted in their getaway by the bay. But statistical analysis of the piles of bones has yielded a very different picture.
Up until fairly recently, well, this study, in fact, there'd been no systematic study of the human skeletal remains in Pompeii. But people had written a lot about the population of Pompeii. They'd always assumed that it was a heterogeneous, that is, a mixed population, because Pompeii was a river port. And they'd always assumed that the people who became victims were the old, the infirm, the very young, and women. And this is the first time we could actually test this information.
Laser has found a large number of genetic traits in these bones that suggest that the population was not cosmopolitan, but rather made up of fairly closely related people. The skulls frequently have an extra bone, and the canine teeth often have 2 roots instead of the usual 1. Another likely genetic link can be found on the insides of the skulls. About 10% of them show benign tumors, whereas a normal skull is smooth inside. This is the signature of a syndrome called hyperostosis frontalis interna, or HFI. And it is this finding that brought Laser's work an unexpected reception.
It's associated with usually postmenopausal women, and there are a number of signs and symptoms that come with it, and they vary a bit, but generally there's a tendency towards obesity, so women become very fat, and they become quite hairy. They tend to grow beards. The Italian press completely went to town and wrote huge articles about whether the women of Pompeii were fat and hairy and ugly, and there have been incredible academic discourses about whether the women were in fact not good looking, and the argument against my work's generally been that the paintings on the wall show beautiful young women.
But for Laser, such reaction is missing the point. The large number of bones of postmenopausal women defies conventional wisdom about the lifespan of ancient Romans.
The Pompeians were probably leading a normal lifespan. If they survived that critical period of high infant mortality, I think they probably survived to a lifespan that was comparable to a modern Western one.
Another grimmer scenario might explain the high number of older people in Laser's sample, as she readily admits. They may have been the ones left behind when Vesuvius unleashed its fury on Pompeii. In AD 79, Vesuvius did not erupt completely without warning, as has often been portrayed. 17 years earlier, a violent earthquake shook the area, and sporadic smaller quakes probably occurred more and more frequently as the fatal day arrived. In the days before the eruption, wells and springs ran dry. Those with the means, the resort population, may have packed up and gone to their safer primary residence. Those without the means, the poorer, more homogeneous group, probably remained behind. There is also evidence that some of the grand villas may have been abandoned by their owners and taken over by squatters. In several, agricultural implements had been hung over the grand wall paintings. August the 24th, AD 79. Across the bay at Misenum, 17-year-old Pliny the Younger and his uncle had just finished lunch when they noticed something strange over Vesuvius. Its general appearance can best be expressed as being like an umbrella pine, for it rose to a great height on a sort of trunk and then split off into branches, wrote the 17-year-old Pliny, whose account would go down in history as the first eyewitness report of a volcanic eruption. To those of us in the 20th century, the Italian umbrella pine is eerily suggestive of something unimaginable to the Pompeians. The mushroom cloud, icon of enormous power and signature of the atomic age. In fact, the study of nuclear explosions has helped geologists decipher the physics of the explosive eruptions, such as the one at Mount St. Helens in 1980. These eruptions, in turn, have helped animate Pliny's account of Vesuvius for volcanologists, like Haraldur Sigurdsson of the University of Rhode Island.
The main eruption, which began just after noon on the 24th of August, was a very large explosive eruption and sent out a column of ash and pumice to a great height in the atmosphere, probably up to about 20 miles. And this ash plume up into the atmosphere then was dispersed by the wind, carried to the south and southeast, right over Pompeii.
In Misenum, Pliny's uncle had already decided to take a closer look when a panicky message arrived from a lady friend at the foot of Vesuvius. Pliny the Elder, a man of gallantry and with an encyclopedic knowledge of natural history, was also an admiral of the Roman fleet. Their scientific excursion turning into a rescue operation, both Plinies bravely set off across the bay by ship. Only one of them would return. The rain of pumice and ash accumulated on the streets of Pompeii at the rate of about a foot every 2 hours. It was not in itself deadly, but by evening it had crushed most of the roofs in the city. Help was no longer on the way. The ashfall forced Pliny's rescue mission to head south to help those at Stabai instead. The Pompeians fled from their collapsing homes into the streets, not knowing that the worst was yet to come. Only in the last decade has science come to grips with the most deadly phase of an explosive eruption, the surge. Based on a discovery made during nuclear testing in the 1940s, volcanologists learned that hot, ground-hugging clouds race away from an explosive eruption, blowing apart and incinerating anything in their paths. Surges leave little trace of themselves in the geological record, but are far deadlier than the more evident pumice falls and lava flows. For the people of Pompeii, they came at the witching hour.
And then around midnight, the style of the activity changed dramatically, and instead of a very high column, now the volcano was producing a fountain of ash and pumice. And this fountain rose up and then collapsed on the flanks of the volcano and raced away as a glowing avalanche of hot ash, traveling at about 100 miles per hour, and temperature high enough to carbonize wood. This ash flow is very similar to what we saw in Mount St. Helens in 1980.
No fewer than 6 of these glowing avalanches raced away from Vesuvius over the next few hours, as the mountain repeatedly exploded and collapsed on itself. The first of these incinerated everyone in Herculaneum, a town some 2.5 miles closer to the foot of the mountain. The third reached the north wall of Pompeii, which saved the remaining Pompeians, for the moment. But in the suburbs to the north, the Lady of Oplontis was not so lucky. She and dozens of others were overcome as they took shelter from the onslaught. Thanks to the lessons learned at Mount St. Helens, we now have a clearer understanding of her last frantic minutes. The eruption at Mount St. Helens claimed 69 lives. They are the only victims of an explosive volcanic eruption to be studied by physicians and forensic specialists. The results, along with new findings about the hot gas avalanches created in such explosions, give the last moments of Pompeii a truly nightmarish quality.
Immediately, the inside of your lungs are burnt, and there is no oxygen or little oxygen in the air. And furthermore, you inhale a lot of ash particles or dust that immediately chokes off the windpipes, and suffocation occurs very, very quickly, or certainly within a minute or two. Besides, that person is suffering skin burns all over the body because of the very high temperature of the ash. So it is a horrible, agonizing death. Fortunately, only lasts for maybe a couple of minutes.
From the expression on her face, the Lady of Atlantis may indeed have choked to death. But her positioning also suggests that she suffered thermal shock or baking, as found in several of the victims of St. Helens.
Right, well, this is very typical of bodies that have been exposed to extremely high temperatures. In the literature, they suggest between 200 and 250 degrees Celsius will cause this almost like a boxer's pose, where you get the arms flexed and the legs flexed and the spine extended. This is quite common with a lot of eruptions where you have these volcanic surges.
About an hour after the lady's unfortunate end, Vesuvius claimed another victim. On the beach at Stabai, the stout-hearted old naturalist Pliny the Elder collapsed from the fumes and died. At about the same time, a fourth glowing avalanche blasted over the north wall into Pompeii at about 200 miles an hour and up to 400 degrees Celsius. In the end, the remarkable human figures and skeletons of Pompeii may represent only a fraction of the toll claimed by Vesuvius, and many more may await the archaeologist's spades. For years, excavations at the nearby city of Herculaneum suggested that it had been abandoned long before the eruption. Only 10 human skeletons had been found. But that changed dramatically in 1982.
We were involved with excavations on the waterfront or on the beach in Herculaneum, and we found that hundreds of skeletons, hundreds of human remains were on the beach, and the people had actually managed to escape and get out of the city, but they were caught between the ocean and the volcano. Similarly, in Pompeii, I think that not a very large number of human remains have been found in the city, and this has led to the view that the city had been largely evacuated. Well, I think that's probably correct, but my suspicion is that we will find with future excavations that a very large proportion of the population is buried under the volcanic deposits just south of the city, which is an area that has never been excavated.
Giuseppe Rossellino, survivor of the small 1944 eruption, reminds us that nothing is certain about Pompeii.
It was a giant. It was picturesque when it was smoking. Since then, it's extinguished. It has finished its cigars. The 18th of March, it will have been 51 years that it hasn't smoked anymore. Until this moment. But who knows?
Volcanologists are reassuring. Vesuvius tends to erupt violently at roughly 700-year intervals. That gives archaeologists another couple of centuries to dig up whatever secrets are still buried under its ancient ash. One remarkable testament to the lives of a doomed people are the graffiti found all over Pompeii. Thousands of personal messages scratched on plaster walls. They're filled with curses and praises for politicians, athletes, and friends, as well as advice on everything from love to table manners. The Pompeians gave vent to both love and hatred with equal exuberance. One wrote, O Cius, I hope that your ulcerous pustules reopen and burn more than they did before. Another scratched. He who loves should live. He who knows not how to love should die. And he who obstructs love should die twice. And of course, one prescient Pompeian wrote, nothing lasts forever.
Skulls fueled the alien invasion argument. There's no evidence to support these claims, but until now, there's been no alternative proof. Over the years, scientific experts have looked at a variety of medical conditions which could explain the cone-shaped skulls. The most famous example is the case of John Merrick, the Elephant Man, whose condition proved that certain types of disease can alter the shape of the human skull. His head reached an astonishing 36 inches in circumference. Merrick suffered from Proteus syndrome, a rare condition which causes bony tumors. It's only been recorded 120 times in all human history. However, there are other more common illnesses which could explain this mystery.
When he was born, some doctors came to me and asked me did I want to put him away. He had the face deformity. It was really different. I never seen anything like it before. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't even ready for it.
Wilhelmina's son Douglas was born with a genetic bone abnormality called Cruzon's syndrome. His skull shape bore a striking resemblance to the skulls found at Nazca.
My doctor said it was a rarity, but it's a possibility I could have been a twin. So I'm just living day by day, doing the best that I can, and try to do the best so I get out of school and go to college, live a normal life like everyone else, so I can succeed in life.
You know that I love you, right?
Douglas is now 18. Despite 20 operations, he still suffers from the dangerous complications of his underlying condition. His skull has stopped growing, but his brain has not.
I have migraine headaches. I have headaches that would last from the time I open my eyes at probably about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to about 7 o'clock in the evening.
The skull of a healthy newborn is made up of 27 bones linked together by soft cartilage. During the first year of life, the bones grow to replace the cartilage and start to fuse together. They continue to fuse until we're 18 years old. But if this process happens too early, the results can be catastrophic. Peru contains over 10,000 specimens, alongside forensic reconstructions of how some of them might have looked. Some are pure coneheads. Others are even more exotic, with beehives and even twin peaks. These people look as if they could have come from another world. Evidence of the Nazca civilization stayed hidden for hundreds of years. But in the early 1930s, pilots flying over southern Peru reported remarkable features etched into the surface of the desert. Today we know them as the Nazca Line, an intricate network of geometric and animal shapes. More than 1,000 of these gigantic drawings are spread over an area of 400 square miles. No one knows how and why they were placed here. The lines were clearly designed to be seen from above, prompting suggestions they'd been created by aliens. Archaeologists spent over 50 years trying to understand these geoglyphs from the evidence on the ground. But the discovery of the bizarre shape, Douglas is being treated at Chicago Children's Hospital by neurosurgeon Dr. David Frimm.
In the front, they were closed when he was born, and so his skull was quite wide, as well as the orbits of the eye, the area where the eyes are and the rims above the eye, they were all mal-shaped, and his eyes were quite far apart.
Douglas's skull has fused together prematurely, but his brain continues to grow. The pressure results in crippling headaches. If left untreated, it can be fatal.
They're planning on increasing my forehead so that my brain can have more space in my skull.
Without modern surgery, the Nazca would have died if they'd had this disease.
I'm just praying that this surgery be my cure and that God heals me.
So could Cruzon syndrome be the explanation for the cone-shaped skulls of the Nazca? CT scans of the skulls of people with Cruzons show the people lived here for 800 years before dying out suddenly 1,200 years ago. No one knows what caused the bizarre deformities. Now, after years of speculation, a team of archaeologists and forensic scientists believe they have unlocked the mystery of this extraordinary race. A mystery which for decades they struggled to explain. Giuseppe Orefici, from the Italian Center for Pre-Columbian Archaeology, has been studying the Nazca skeletons for the last 20 years. Many of the Nazca burial sites have been looted. The valuable textiles and jewelry have been stolen. But the skulls still have a remarkable story to tell.
We've not found a single skull from the Nazca area that is not deformed. All of them, absolutely all of them, present these deformities.
Many of them have ended up in the largest collection of skulls in the world. The cranium room at the National Anthropology Museum in Lima,